All right, let's jump right into this. Welcome back to another deep dive on the Explainer. Today, we're stepping into a completely fascinating, honestly pretty terrifying world of grinding gears and absolute dogma. Picture this Explainer as a dark, mythic graphic novel. We're going to explore a grim ideological battle using a classic Fichtean dialectic. So, we'll look at a thesis, an antithesis, and then see how they violently crash together in a synthesis. On one side of this, we have Sir Brain. He's a self-proclaimed mechanical god. And on the other, we have Alara. She's a blind horologist, basically a master clockmaker who acts as the mirror of reason. She sees right through his cold metal facade. It's this brilliant, tense clash between absolute machine control and the persistent pulse of humanity. So let's wind the clock and get started.
Let's plunge right into the tension here. Imagine being high up in this wind-scoured clock tower, the air smelling of old ice and violet promise. Alara stands there and tells Sir Brain, "You planted a plague in the gutters of Geneva and named it destiny." I mean, wow, her words strike like a filed pinion, like a tiny, razor-sharp gear wheel, right against Sir Brain's cold, absolute iron. She is completely unafraid of his power. She's stripping away all his myth-making, taking this grand narrative he calls destiny and calling it exactly what it is to her, a plague. This sets up a power struggle that isn't just about physical control, it's a battle over the very definition of reason itself.
Which brings us to Section 1, the thesis. The machine god's dogma and his underlying fear of stopping. To really wrap our heads around this conflict, we first have to understand the strict, deterministic reality of Sir Brain's sublime prison. He claims absolute dominion over this world. He believes his dark fire is a sovereign flame, meaning he hasn't just built a machine. He genuinely believes he has burned the right to turn directly into the metal of the world. It's an incredibly terrifying concept of ultimate determinism. He doesn't just want obedience from the gears, you see. He wants the gears to have no fundamental capacity to do anything but obey his specific commanding logic.
And you can literally hear that absolute arrogance in his own words. He watches Alara's hands with this strange mix of hunger and disdain. His voice is described as low and metallic, and it just reveals this absolute refusal to yield to any human touch or any alternate rhythm. What use could your blind fingers invent that my dark fire has not already decided? It's the ultimate statement of a closed system. For him, he has reached the end of invention, the end of history, really. He thinks he's replaced all human variables with his own mechanical certainty.
But here's the twist. Despite all this projected godhood, Alara discovers a massive vulnerability. As her fingertips trace the residual heat of his gears, she maps out a totally different story. Yes, the mesh of the gears is perfect, but there's a tiny hesitation in every single engagement. She realizes that his sovereign majesty is, well, it's actually just a mask. The seams of his creation are groaning. That tiny hesitation, it's a physical manifestation of Bran's hidden, desperate fear of stopping. He isn't actually driven by divine purpose. He's paralyzed by the terror of silence. Because if the gears stop, his godhood ceases to exist.
So that takes us to Section 2, the antithesis, the mirror's yielding logic and the definition of the soft error.
If Sir Brain is all about this commanding, unyielding mechanical dogma, Alara introduces a yielding, human rhythm into the machine. She doesn't fight his fire with more fire. Instead, she approaches those exact same gears with a completely different philosophy of how the universe should operate. And this brings us to a really beautiful concept in this fable, the soft error. Alara proposes reversing the cut of the teeth on the gears, to introduce a deliberate escapement, basically a mechanical joint that yields to pressure to regulate energy, rather than just rigidly commanding it. She argues the fire doesn't need to be put out, it just needs to be taught a different beat, one that doesn't require the world to literally grind itself to powder. It's a profound metaphor for keeping human nuance alive within rigid systems. It allows for breath, for pause, for humanity.
This clash is absolutely the heart of our Explainer today. On one side, we have Brain's commanding dogma, a universe operating as a sublime prison, entirely deterministic, entirely driven by the terror of stopping. And then on the other side, Alara's yielding logic. She's advocating for an escapement that accommodates human rhythm, looking to teach rather than extinguish. It's rigid versus flexible. The dictator versus the guide. Brain demands that the machine dictates destiny, but Alara insists the machine can actually learn to accommodate the pulse of humanity.
Now, Alara's reasoning doesn't just come from engineering, it's deeply rooted in what she calls mechanical nostalgia.
The text describes this as an old wound. It's this persistent human hunger for a morning that needed no gears and no gods. It's that deep, inherent longing we have for a time before machines dictated our time and our destiny. And Alara uses this nostalgia not as a weakness, but as a core grounding principle. It's basically the one drop of oil that keeps the human spirit from being entirely crushed by the metal.
But, we really have to ask ourselves this question. Even Sir Brain admits that this nostalgia is the only door that still leads outward. But is it a door we can actually walk through? Does Alara's mechanical nostalgia offer a genuine escape from this grim, dark tower? Or is it just a comforting illusion? Once the machine of society, or in this case, Brain's literal machine, is built and set into motion, is a return to ordinary, human warmth even possible anymore? Or are we just forever bound to the gears?
All right, Section 3, the synthesis, the tragic fracture, and sovereignty versus the tantrum.
Up high in that tower, these two totally irreconcilable ideologies, the commanding thesis and the yielding antithesis, finally crash into one another. And Alara does not hold back. Standing there with her back to the great pendulum, she strips away the absolute last of his divine pretenses. She says, "You call yourself mechanical god while your own seams groan with the terror of silence." She is holding up the mirror of reason, forcing him to look at the terrified mechanism he truly is. He isn't a god sitting above the system, he is a prisoner of it, trapped by his own absolute inability to just be still. Look at how differently they view sovereignty. Brain claims his reason is the result of shedding the heavy pack of social constraints. He views himself as a cloud that simply no longer needs the sun. But Alara reframes this entirely. To her, this isn't sovereignty at all. It's a logical fallacy. She calls it the tantrum of a machine that's terrified to be wound by any hand other than its own. So what Brain sees as ultimate freedom, Alara sees as a desperate, lonely isolation.
And because neither side is going to yield, Brain can't yield and Alara absolutely refuses to validate his dogma, this ideological deadlock just hurtles toward a breaking point. The text calls this the 12 o'clock crack. It is the inevitable midnight fracture that Brain's own deterministic parables promised all along. The system is so incredibly rigid, so devoid of Alara's soft error that it literally cannot bend. And well, in a deterministic universe, what cannot bend must eventually break.
Even when it comes to destruction, they couldn't be further apart. Brain perceives this impending fracture as this noble choice. He thinks that if he cracks at midnight, it is a choice that belongs to him alone. Like, it's the ultimate act of a mechanical god defining his own end. But Alara critiques this so harshly. She sees absolutely no nobility in it. To her, it is simply inevitable failure. It's the mathematical certainty of a rigid system that stubbornly refused that one drop of oil of humanity. It's not some glorious sacrifice, it's a design flaw running its natural course. Her final words here just echo so hauntingly in that wind-scoured chamber. It will be the sound of a lonely escapement finally admitting it was never a god, only a creature too frightened to stop. She completely dismantles his legacy before it even fractures. She ensures that when the clock tower eventually breaks, he will know and the whole world will know that it wasn't the dramatic death of a god, but just the final gasp of a terrified machine. Which leaves us with this final, really provocative thought. As we reflect on this fable, and maybe even look around at our own increasingly mechanized, data-driven world, what should we take away from this? Is true sovereignty ever actually possible without humanity? Can a system completely devoid of yielding human logic survive? Or is any machine, whether it's literal or societal, that's driven only by the fear of stopping, doomed to eventually shatter? Think about where you see the dark fire in the world today, and ask yourself, are we capable of introducing the soft error before the clock strikes 12? Thanks for joining me on this explainer. Keep questioning the gears.